Are you trying to win that tender? Do you go for bids? I spoke to Richard Tobias from Impart Ltd. They boast a 90% plus tender success rate. Richard talked to us about writing compelling tenders, how to decide whether you should go for that tender or not, how to talk in the right language, the things to think about, how to score, understanding the different weights, and ultimately how to win that tender, whether it be a tender, a bid, a grant application. There was loads of advice. So please do enjoy. I wanted to introduce Richard. Richard, are you sharing slides today or not? I wasn't sure.
Yes, I am.
I should have asked you this earlier. Just a bit of background. But the thing here is that I've known Richard for a long time and what he does, and the what you talk about, Richard, you can actually apply to getting grants. You can apply to proposal documents, winning tenders, winning bids.
Absolutely.
I think a lot of people don't think about exploring tenders or exploring bids. So I think most of us can apply this in lots of different ways. And as I said, even if it's just the sort of putting an email together on for a quote or a proposal, I think there's some really key stuff here. So Richard, just a bit of background. What's you were IT background and working a lot for the NHS, weren't you?
Yeah, so look, my background is various sales and sort of commercial positions in IT organizations, IT outsourcers and the like. But 8 years ago, took the decision to make a leap. So left large corporate and set up Impart, and we now help organizations basically win large contracts, predominantly through tenders. We also done work with the likes of Leeds City Council to help them secure significant grant applications. We do work with Leeds City Council also on things like strategy documents, business cases, because really what we do is about producing compelling content that's going to be persuasive and encourage people to either part with money or invest in something or whatever it happens to be.
Okay. Do you want to, if you've got slides to share, feel free to put them on the screen.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay, we'll do.
And we'll go for sort of 10, 15 minutes. We'll get some questions, get some conversation going, see where it goes.
No, that's fine.
Does just out of curiosity, just maybe by show of hands, who currently would consider writing it for a tender? And does anyone currently put tenders out at all? No. Okay. And who writes proposals? Just put your hand up.
Not that I have done in the past, in jobs, paid jobs, but I haven't in my own business.
Yep.
Okay.
Cool. Okay. Yeah, we've got your slides.
Okay. Yeah, can you see that?
We can.
Brilliant. Okay. So, look, we've been speaking to Johnny. I've got about sort of 13 to 15 minutes worth of sort of content here. I'm going to fly through a lot. I mean, I could talk about this for days. So I am flying through at a bit of a pace. So please, I'm more than happy to share any of the content if people want it. And look, just in case anyone's not familiar, a tender is just a formal procurement process that is used by enterprise, public sector to basically assess potential suppliers. And the idea being that it's some form of objective assessment. It is important to recognise, though, before I sort of dive into this, that the old adage about people buying off people is absolutely true. So please don't think for a minute that writing good content, writing good tenders negates the need for selling. If you are proactive, building relationships, educating, influencing, even manipulating clients before a procurement, you're in a much better position. It's also important to recognise that politics, relationships all have a big impact on these outcomes. It's not always as objective as you'd want it to be. And ultimately, and I've actually seen this happen, if a customer wants a particular outcome, they can manipulate the tender process to get the outcome that they want. But saying that, I still do feel that the majority of procurements that organisations undertake are fair. So, look, what I'm going to fly through then over the coming minutes. Firstly, just direct you to where to find public sector tender opportunities, and then talk a little bit about the bid no bid decision. So not necessarily just blindly bidding for everything that you see. Explain some of the things you need to be thinking about. So understanding the rules of the game that is the tender, and then giving you some tips around actual content writing. So very straightforward actually with regards to where to find tenders. Nowadays, every public sector tender over a particular financial threshold, which is currently 118K, you can find on a website called Find Tender, and there's the URL, and smaller opportunities can be found on Contracts Finder. Every public sector organisation has to publish their opportunities here, but you'll also find that public sector organisations have their own procurement portal. So as it happens, pretty much all the councils in Yorkshire use something called Pro Contract, and all opportunities will also be advertised there, and you could subscribe to these portals, and that's also where you end up getting the tender documents and submitting your responses and so on. Private sector organisations, on the other hand, can do whatever they like. Basically, you will find some pseudo public sector entities like utilities still need to abide by certain rules, but generally with private sector, it's a free-for-all. In terms of the bid no bid decision, look, we would really encourage you to not blindly bid for everything. Always reflect on, what is important to your organisation? What are the main factors that would actually influence your decision making around this? It could be whether it's an appealing size, so that could be in terms of the money or the scope. You might particularly like or dislike complex opportunities, or it may be a small opportunity but getting you into a much bigger organisation. You may need to reflect on if you've got capacity to even do it, or you may only want to bid for things where you actually have relevant experience or you even know people involved in the evaluation. So we would always encourage organisations, try and be as objective and consistent as you can when you're looking at an opportunity. Try and take the emotion out of it. Try not to be influenced by the number of zeros on the end of the opportunity. Would even suggest the default position is you should not be bidding unless you can think up a really good reason why you should be. And what you want to do ultimately is assess all of your opportunities against some consistent criteria. So the way many of our clients do it is have some form of spreadsheet. You have the important factors to you that are weighted, and then you try and score the opportunity against them. That might be through things like yes, no's, highs, mediums, lows, scoring things 0s to 5s. And they all create a score, and then the outcome or the total score gives you a view on whether you should pursue that bid. But ultimately, there's really three fundamental questions you want to be asking. Can you actually do what's required, which is what most people focus on? Can you actually win it, which is not always that easy to answer? And is it actually worth winning? And you'll have a view on what good looks like for you. So in terms of the things you want to be considering with the tender and looking at, so firstly, there's the specification. So you need to understand what is it they're asking for. Is it all mandatory, or is some of it mandatory, some of it desirable? And you need to be comfortable you can meet it all. You also need to make sure you're comfortable that you're able to answer the questions and it's not potentially highlighting some limitations around your capability. Often in the public sector, they'll actually tell you what the budget is. And no great surprise, if you're over the budget, they reserve the right to remove you from the process. They'll bombard you with a whole load of dates. The one people tend to focus on is the submission, and clearly that's important, but you'll be a deadline for when you can ask questions of them if you need greater clarity on things. They may mandate a particular date for presentations if you get through to the next stage, so make sure you get these things booked in. And also think about the date they're going to award and when you need to start delivering, because that duration may be appropriate or it may potentially cause you some issues. You need to reflect on that as well. They'll also tell you whether or what the overarching criteria is. If they view what they're buying as being a commodity, it will probably be purely price-based, whereas most procurements are actually involving a combination of quality and price. So they refer to this as most economically advantageous tender. And what they should be doing is actually telling you what the weighting is or the ratio is between your quality submission and your price submission. Could be 80-20, could be 60-40, whatever it is they need to tell you. And they should also tell you what the weightings are for every aspect of your quality submission. So you know exactly what every answer or every section is going to be worth. I cannot emphasize enough the importance of get this information into a spreadsheet at the outset. There is no such thing as a perfect response. You could always polish it and improve it. And what you want to do is actually focus on polishing and improving the answers with the highest weightings. Because if you can get an extra mark out of them, then when you apply the weighting, it will have a more material, more significant impact on your ultimate score. I mean, just to illustrate this, here we have two bidders. This first bidder did pretty well. They got 37 out of 50. So all of these scores are from 1 to 5. And when you apply the weightings, they get 70.8%, which is perfectly respectable. This second bidder, however, does significantly worse. As you can see, they got a number of 1s, some 3s, a 4, and a few 5s. But because they did better on the questions that are worth more, when you apply the weightings, they actually win, even though the quality of the submission is materially or significantly worse. And that was purely as a result of focusing on the questions that are worth more. So understanding the weightings is really important. What they will also share with you is how they're going to evaluate and score your response. So what you need to include within your quality answers, how, if you're not the cheapest price, they're going to calculate what your price score should be. And this can have a massive impact on not only whether you should bid or not, but what your strategy may be in terms of answering questions and also your pricing. Now, you don't need to read this slide, but this is an example of what is quite detailed evaluation criteria. And it may well be that this actually changes on a question by question or a section by section basis. On the other hand, you may have criteria that's really vague like this, and it can end up applying to the whole bid. Now, in this example, if you provide an answer that fully addresses every part of the question and fully addresses every requirement of the customer, the best score you can get is a 5, half marks. The only way you can do better than that and actually get 70 or 100% is by clearly showing where you add value. So showing where you go above and beyond what has been requested. Now, to me, some and significant are pretty subjective terms, and I would suggest how they feel about your organization and how they feel about the quality of your submission would probably have an influence over whether they ended up giving you a 7 or a 10. In terms of the price evaluation, a lot of people focus purely on the price weighting, and yes, that's important, but how you're going to get scored is also vitally important. And I can sort of share with you the 3 most common examples. The first one is a really simple ratio between lowest price and your price. So if you double the price, you get half the marks. If you're 4 times the price, which you'd hope would never happen, you're still getting 25% of the mark. So this methodology, which is the most common one, is actually fairly forgiving around price differences. The second example is just really a more aggressive version of the first one, where if you're double the price, you get no marks. So if you're 50% more expensive, you're still getting half the marks. And the last one, often the companies where price is maybe not a big factor, so it could be 20 to 30%, but when you actually read the detail, what actually happens is for every 1% more expensive you are than the lowest price, you lose 1 of that 20 or 30%. So if you're 20% out, you may get no price marks. So even if you're putting in a really good response, you're still highly unlikely to win because of it. So it's really important to understand both the weightings and the criteria. And then finally, you need to be understanding what constraints they're going to put on you around the content. Most public sector procurements limit how much wordage you can include. What I would say is use that limit as a guide as to how much content you should include, because it gives an indication of the level of detail they're expecting. But they may mandate a word limit, a character limit, which includes spaces, and even a page limit. All right? They may even dictate whether you're allowed to use diagrams and in what way they influence the various limits as well. If you go over a limit, they will remove whatever content you've included beyond that limit from the response before it actually finds its way to the evaluators. All right, so these are all the various documents and things you need to be reflecting on before you even start putting pen to paper. And in terms of the production of the content, so this is actually a frustrated evaluator. I thought I'd share with you the most common issues that most organisations do most of the time. So these are the things that most organisations do that cost them marks and actually really hack off evaluators. So when you are writing content, it's important to be cognizant of these things, and it's going to give you the best possible chance of being successful. So, for example, having content that's really clearly been written by lots of different people, you're meant to be one organisation speaking with one voice. It's amazing how often it happens, but answer the question. If the question has 5 bits, make sure you cover all 5 bits. I've mentioned the evaluation criteria. Sometimes it's asking for added value, it might ask for evidence, it might ask for benefits. If you don't address the scoring criteria, you're leaving lots of marks on the table. This is a really, really vital part. It might not seem very obvious, but what an evaluator wants to do is read the question and then read your answer in exactly the same order, and ideally have subheadings in it to signpost to them clearly which bit of the question you're addressing. It means they can just go down both the question and the answer really easily and tick stuff off. If you structure your answer in a way that is different to that, it takes them a lot longer to review and actually is really quite irritating and frustrating, and they will mark you down for it, even though officially they probably shouldn't. Think about who's evaluating it. What we'd always recommend is look at the language they've got in the question and make sure you're using the same language in your answer. But also think about their likely level of understanding. If they're not as technical or knowledgeable about you in the subject matter, maybe you have to dumb it down a little bit or use slightly more basic language or include explanations so they can understand it. If they don't understand it, it's hard to score it. If you're going to be making claims about how good you are, evidence it, show you've done these things before, but also show you've done them well. All right, that's really important. If all you're doing is showing where you've done it, you might have been terrible for 20 years. So you need to include statistics and evidence to demonstrate the quality as well. In terms of what it looks like, I don't mean spend money on making it glossy and beautiful. Really basic things like short paragraphs, space between paragraphs, having your answers in different colors to the questions. All of these things make it visually more pleasant for the evaluator. Also, you need to remember it's a selling document. So articulate what you're offering and how it's going to make things better for the customer. Or if it's a public sector body, it may be that there's a knock-on effect that's going to benefit patients or citizens. So explain this to them, because organizations and people buy things because of the benefits they're going to get out of it. Make sure you're focusing on the right people. You should be focusing on the customer and potentially on patients and citizens. It's not meant to be a document that's just waffling on about how good you think you are. So focus on them. And then finally, think about the content that you're using. Tenders, if you've ever done them, are resource intensive and time consuming. And naturally, the starting point for a tender is a previous tender. It's important to recognize it's a starting point. If you're using marketing collateral off your website, it's going to be generic. You always need to customize it and bespoke it so it's absolutely relevant to the questions that have been asked of you. Okay, I've rattled through it. I hope it was useful, but that is me. So yes, any questions? Let me just stop sharing.
Yeah, that was really good. And just something to say before we open it to the floor. I've worked with lots and lots of different people, and having worked with Richard, he knows how to win tenders. They've got a 95% success rate, I believe. And the key points for me, and as I said, you can use this in the proposals that you write, is that it's all, for me, the things that jumped out are using their language, writing it in the same order that they've requested. What also really helped, I found, with working with Richard, was giving me the ability to say no to things. So having a scoring system that that really helps me understand, do we want this, and is it right, and should we be saying yes to this? So that was the other thing. And then the last thing that really I think came out in the last slide there, Richard, was around you know, you say you do something, but you know, what's the evidence? And what you said to me a number of years ago was, you look at it, look at what you've written, and keep saying, so what? And until you've got an amazing answer to that so what question, then the answer's not good enough. So yeah, thank you very much, Richard. That was I really liked that. Do we have questions at all? Anyone got anything they would like to ask? Yeah, Joe, go for it.
Hiya, we go for tenders, and there's sometimes an unrealistic expectation. And when I say that is, for example, they'll turn around and say, we want 10 million public liability insurance. They want ISO, we've got ISO 9001, but they want ISO 9020 million or whatever it is. Or they turn around and say, we know that in this area, there are 10 million businesses that we want to tap into. One, we know damn well that it's not correct. Two, how can we educate them rather than being nice? And do I turn around and say, right, okay, because we haven't got that 10 million, I mean, I've spoken to our insurance broker and he's turned around and says, you've got 5 million public liability. He says, that's adequate for what you actually do, but they want 10 million. Do I actually turn around and bite the bullet and say, right, okay, I've got to go for that 10 million. I appreciate that it does then depend on whether it's cost viable, etc. Or is it worth actually submitting your tender to turn around and say, right, okay, we don't want it, but we're the only people that can actually help you. So there's a couple of questions in there, Richard. I do apologise. One, it's about educating them to make sure that, and two, is it, do you have to 100% follow what they say and their expectations, even though they could well be unrealistic?
Okay, so firstly, there's a clarification process that can be used.
Yeah.
So things like insurances, you could perfectly reasonably go back and ask or explain that, because they are anonymous, that it's only 5 million, given the scope of what you're providing, would that be acceptable? They'll probably say no.
Right.
Insurances tends to be fairly black and white. You either say you're going to meet them or not. Normally, it only needs to be in place if you're successful. So what most organizations would do is you understand what the cost of that increase is and you just build it into your cost base for them and deal with it that way if it's viable. If it's going to impact your ability to be competitive, they may influence your decision to bid or not.
You would actually, so you would turn around and say, because the thing is, I would hate, we deal with a lot of colleges and I would hate, they talk to each other. And I would hate to think that we were charging one a lot more than another. And can we justify that?
Well, if they've got different requirements, I mean, the fact is, if one is insisting on 10 million insurance and another one isn't, then that has a cost associated with it.
Right.
So that would be acceptable. But over time, you may just take the hit on it corporately, or you may spread it across multiple things. In terms of the specification, it's very common that buying organizations write terrible specifications. They don't understand the requirements properly. And then it's how do you deal with it? The issue is, if you raise it through the clarification process, you need to be very careful you don't make them look or feel stupid.
This is it. Yeah.
Because there's the human aspect. So the ideal way of doing it involves being proactive. It's trying to educate and influence organizations you're targeting before the procurement.
Absolutely. I agree with that. That's the normal process of, we get into the colleges direct, and then if there's a tender, we're an incumbent. So therefore that makes it a lot easier.
Absolutely.
And that's kind of strategy.
Yes. The only ways of dealing with it are either through the clarification process, which means if they state a position, everyone's got commonality around that understanding, or you might need to raise certain caveats or assumptions just to protect yourself in a particular situation that goes into your bid.
Brilliant. Thank you.
That's right.
Anyone else got a question at all?
Okay, I mean, Johnny, just to sort of add on the point that you said, I was going to say, I mean, that last slide, a lot of it really is just down to put yourself in the customer's shoes and think about how can you make this as easy as you possibly can for them.
Yeah.
So using language they're familiar with, structuring it in a way that mirrors their questions, explaining things in simple terms. It's all of those things that makes it easy. Quite often on bids, you can have many organizations submitting, and reading tenders is really boring.
Yeah.
And if yours is easy to read and everyone else's is a pain in the neck, you will stand out in that regard massively.
Yeah. And
I was just going to say, sorry, Johnny, I was going to say, I really like the fact that you say focus on what the benefits are going to be for the end customer, because I've written a couple of tenders, both in this role and in another role, and I think it's so easy to focus on, like, well, we'll do this and we'll do that and we'll do this, and there's value engineering, there's value added and all that kind of stuff, when actually you should be saying, well, what that benefit's going to mean for the actual end user, the end customer. And that I really like that. I've made a big note of that. Thank you.
What you're providing, so we, for example, work with a lot of NHS trusts that are providing clinical services, and there are benefits that are delivered to the commissioner, so the people buying the services, but there's a lot of benefits around better outcomes and more responsive
to the patients
service.
and
Absolutely.
That's really good. Thank you.
Fab, anything else at all? As I say, I think it's really important that you consider these things when you're writing a quote and when you're writing a proposal. I was helping someone buy some services only yesterday, the day before. The services were just all in an email, difficult to read, difficult to pick out the numbers. And I turned around to the people that are quoting, and I said, why the hell isn't this in a nicely designed PDF, and why haven't you made the pricing clear? And they were after it was a $3,000 a month contract for 12 months, so it's it was just in an email. So I think there's some real basics that can be applied. And the so what, by the way, was when you're writing case studies, keep saying so what until you've got some really good answers. Richard, if people would like to win a tender or find the best bids that are out there, what's the best place to contact you?
Okay, so you can look for bids clearly on these, all the links and things that I shared. I can share the slide deck. Johnny's got my email address and things. We're very happy to provide guidance. As it happens, something that we are doing with some organisations at the moment, and I'm happy to sort of extend it to yourselves. If any of you do tenders, if you have a recent tender that you would like us to basically go through and provide you feedback on, I'm happy to do it at no cost. So you will basically get a document with lots of detailed markup in it and lots of comments and suggestions on how it could maybe be honed and improved. Obviously, we'll acknowledge the strengths as well, but normally there ends up being quite a lot of comments and edits in these things. So yes, again, if you want to share something, and more than happy to sign a non-disclosure agreement.
You'll rip it apart, but in a nice way.
Yes.
Also, do you find that sometimes that tenders, we were actually looking at one the other day, and it was 20 pages long, and it were 20 pages that really could have been condensed into one page, and that were it. But do you think that they're trying to put people off?
It's a tactic.
Right.
There's a whole range of different ways that organisations can try and put people off or steer things in a particular direction. But depending on how important they view the requirement, they want to be able to gauge the quality of what they're getting from the bidders, or they may want to try and differentiate between the different capabilities of organisations. And the way to do it is by asking more challenging questions or asking for a lot of information.
To be fair, they were just blurbing on. But anyway, that's fine.
Can I ask a really quick question, Richard? We did a tender recently, and the winner got 90%. The next best got 50%. Now, would you say then that the company that got 90% were possibly either the incumbent, or there was some additional knowledge was known?
It could. I mean, I'm not trying to be.
That's a big jump.
It is. So we review a lot of content from a whole range of different organisations. So we get involved in bids anything from like 50k to about £1 billion, with some big household name organisations and some small startups. So incredibly varied. This is a generalisation. Most organisations are not very good at tendering. And most of the issues that we see are the things I put on that slide. Right. Even massive organisations with big bid teams fall foul of a whole load of those things. It may be that they were biased and they wanted to just give them the contract. They may have inside knowledge, or they may have actually just been good at writing the bid. They may have even been involved in actually writing the tender or writing the questions.
Yeah. I'm sure that there is a website, isn't there, where you can find out where. I know Joe's just put the freedom of information thing there, but I'm sure there is a website where you can see who's been awarded a tender. I just can't remember which one it is off the top of my head.
So those links that I gave you.
Yeah.
There's also at the end of a tender process, there's a contract award notification.
Right, I'll go and have a look at that then.
Jamie's very kindly put those links.
So you can actually then send a Freedom of Information Act request to the company, Lucy.
Yeah.
And then they've actually got to tell you if it's a governing organisation, and it'll also tell you when it's up for renewal again.
Richard,
right, brilliant.
Richard, your details, because we didn't get your details. So where would we find you? Where would we find you online?
Okay, www.
Here, Jamie can put this in the chat.
.impart.co.uk.
Impart.co.uk.
Yeah. Well, my email address is richard.tobias@impart.co.uk.
Brilliant. Thanks.
Can I ask a question in terms of some of the council tendering? We do quite a lot of responding to more private tenders. We do a lot of schoolwork, and we do that. We're quite successful in it. And in the past, we used to do a lot of council tendering for smaller projects. And one of the issues we found was payment terms, because the payment terms were ridiculous, and retentions. I'm not in an industry where retentions falls part of it. And all that we would do then is we got to a point that we would take the retention out of the costings, if you like. So we worked on everything up to the retention, and if we got the retention, that they would do anything they can not to pay it. Have times moved on in the last 4 or 5 years in terms of how councils structure the payment terms? Because they were incredibly unrealistic for smaller businesses. I just wondered what your view is on that.
There's been a big government focus on payment terms and treating SMEs appropriately. And certainly nowadays, I think pretty much everyone gets paid within 30 days from public sector. And interestingly, if you are bidding to get onto public sector framework contracts, if you as a private sector organisation don't comply with the government's preferred payment terms in terms of how you pay your subcontractors, that can be a mechanism for them rejecting you onto one of their framework contracts. So they're trying to drive better behaviour from the private sector. I mean, we have a mix of clients. I'll be honest, our public sector clients are by far better payers.
Yeah, we won a large PFI project many years ago, and it got lumped in with the, if you like, the construction. So we were on 6-month, 12-month, and 18-month retentions, which is just completely unrealistic for what we do. That's interesting. Yeah, good. I'll go look at them again. Thanks.
Well, thanks very much, Richard. Very helpful conversation. Well, I hope you got a lot out of that. If you're looking for more, please do subscribe and head over to either the website fleek.marketing or the Yorkshire Business Club on Facebook for lots of local networking and working with peers and getting inspiration and getting to network with other businesses. See you all next time. Take care.